For 30 consecutive days, I walked through the gates of the most heavily guarded residence in the entire country, carrying a small glass bottle in my pocket. Every single day, 30 times. And every single day before I left that building, I made a secret exchange that no one in those marble hallways ever noticed. If even one person had seen what I was doing, if one guard had searched my coat at the wrong moment, if one official had asked the right question, I would not be sitting here telling you this story. I would have simply disappeared. Like so many others before me. Here is what I need you to understand before I tell you everything. By the end of what I am about to share with you, you will realize that the most dangerous decision I ever made was not replacing the medicine. It was deciding what to replace it with. To understand why I ever found myself standing outside that heavily guarded residence, trembling behind a calm expression I had practiced every morning in front of a cracked mirror, I need to take you back to who I was before any of this began. My name is Sister Miriam. I had lived inside the walls of St. Catherine's Convent for over 14 years when all of this happened. 14 years of morning prayers before sunrise, of quiet meals and long silences, of kneeling on cold stone floors and feeling somehow completely at peace. I was not a woman who sought drama. I was not a woman who sought anything, really, except God and the chance to be useful to suffering people. That was my entire world. That was enough for me. Our convent operated a small medical care facility attached to our grounds. We served the poor, the elderly, the forgotten. I had spent years assisting in clinics and hospital wards before taking my vows, and so the sisters trusted me with responsibilities that went beyond prayer and garden work. I helped prepare medications under the supervision of our resident physician, an elderly man we all called Dr. Anselm. He was gentle and precise and had a memory like a steel trap. He trusted me completely. That trust, as it turned out, was the thread that would unravel everything. The country I lived in was called Valoria in the story I am about to tell you, and Valoria was afraid. That is the only way I know how to describe it accurately. It was not the kind of fear that makes people run or scream. It was quieter than that. It was the fear that makes people lower their voices in restaurants, that makes neighbors avoid eye contact, that makes a teacher pause before answering a student's innocent question about history. General Marius Kroll had ruled Valoria for nearly 2 decades. His name alone changed the air in a room. People did not speak against him. People did not speak about him at all if they could help it. I had spent 14 years insulating myself from all of that through faith and service. Which is exactly why what happened next blindsided me so completely. It began with something small. So ordinary I almost dismissed it entirely. Dr. Anselm received an official summons one Tuesday morning requesting that our facility assist in coordinating pharmaceutical support for a government patient. The request used careful, bureaucratic language. It said the patient required a specialist medication that was being sourced through multiple channels to ensure continuous supply. It said our facility had been selected because of our reputation for discretion and our certified preparation protocols. It never used the patient's name, but Dr. Anselm went pale when he read it. He folded the letter very slowly, and then he looked at me and said quietly, "Sister Miriam, we do not have a choice in this matter." Within a week, I was inside the residence. My official role was simple. I was a certified pharmaceutical assistant tasked with delivering and confirming the daily dosage of a specialized cardiac medication for the patient. The medication had to be prepared fresh and delivered in person each morning. It sounds clinical, routine. It was neither of those things. The first time I walked through those gates, my hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I had prayed for calm, and I had received it, but the inside of that residence unsettled me in ways I had not anticipated. It was enormous and cold and full of men with expressionless faces who watched every movement without appearing to watch at all. I was escorted to a small medical anteroom each morning, where I confirmed the dosage log, handed over the sealed bottle, and left. I never saw General Kroll directly. I was simply a nun with a bottle, unremarkable, invisible. Everything changed on day 9. I arrived at my usual time and found the anteroom empty. The attendant who normally met me was not there. I waited. And while I waited, I noticed something on the small table beside the medication ledger: a glass bottle, identical in shape and label to the one I carried. Except the seal had already been broken and resealed imperfectly, slightly crooked, the kind of thing you only notice if you have spent years handling medications and checking seals the way I had. I should have said nothing. I should have walked away. Instead, I picked it up, and I looked more carefully at the label. The printed name of the medication matched. But the handwritten batch notation in the corner, the tiny alphanumeric code that Dr. Anselm had taught me to verify, was wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely different from anything in our preparation records. I set it down before the attendant returned. I smiled. I left. And for the next 2 days, I could not sleep. I told Dr. Anselm what I had seen. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. He said, "Miriam, this is not the first time I have seen discrepancies in those records, but I was warned never to pursue it." Who warned him? He would not say. But the fear in his eyes told me the warning had been serious. Over the next several days, I began paying closer attention. Each morning I arrived early enough to observe small things: an extra attendant who was never introduced, a secondary medication log that appeared briefly on the table and then disappeared before I could read it. And then, on day 14, I found a handwritten note tucked beneath the corner of the primary ledger. It was unsigned. It said only, "The real formula was changed 6 weeks ago. He does not know." I stood very still when I read that, because I suddenly understood what was actually happening. General Kroll's inner circle, specifically 3 senior officials whose names I would only confirm later, had been systematically altering his cardiac medication. Not to kill him, that was what took me so long to understand. They were keeping him just unwell enough, disoriented, dependent, manageable. A general who could barely hold a thought was a general whose decisions someone else could quietly control. The country was not being run by Kroll. It was being run by the men manipulating his condition. And the suffering of ordinary Valorians, the curfews, the crackdowns, the disappearances were not truly Kroll's decisions anymore. They were the decisions of men who hid entirely behind his name and his signature. That realization hit me like cold water in winter, because it meant that correcting the medicine giving him the proper, prescribed cardiac treatment he was supposed to be receiving might actually allow a clearer-minded man to emerge. A man I feared. A man whose record was already terrible, but also a man whose mind was currently being stolen from him by people with even fewer scruples. I spent 3 nights in the chapel wrestling with that. I prayed until my knees ached and the candles burned down, and I kept arriving at the same answer. Every human life has dignity, even his, and the manipulation of his medical condition was being used to harm thousands of people who had no part in any of it. The corruption was the true enemy, not one sick old man in a cold residence. So on day 17, I began the exchange. Each morning, I carried the correctly prepared cardiac medication that Dr. Anselm and I had quietly verified against the original prescription records we managed to locate through a retired pharmacist contact who owed the convent an old, quiet debt. I arrived, I smiled at the guards, I confirmed the log, and before I left the anteroom, I switched the bottle on the table, the altered one, with the one I carried. The new bottle, the real one, looked absolutely identical, because I had made sure of that. Every single morning for 13 more days, I did this. 13 mornings of steady hands and a racing heart, and the absolute certainty that if I hesitated even slightly, it would be over. On day 28, one of the senior officials arrived in the anteroom while I was still there. He looked at me. I looked at him. He asked me how long the current batch of medication would last. I told him exactly what the log said. Nothing more. He nodded and left. I did not breathe properly for the rest of that morning. On day 30, I brought something else with me alongside the medication. Dr. Anselm and I had compiled everything we had: the discrepant batch notations, the unsigned note, the original prescription records, the retired pharmacist's written statement confirming the formula alterations, and a careful, factual account of everything I had observed across 30 days. I gave none of it to anyone inside that residence. Instead, I handed it to a journalist, a quiet, careful woman who had spent years documenting government abuses from the edges of Valorian society. She had been connected to me through the retired pharmacist, though I had not known that was her until our only meeting. I handed her the documents. I walked back to the convent, and I waited. The story broke 11 days later. The evidence was undeniable. An independent medical review confirmed the formula alterations. The three senior officials were arrested. International observers were brought in. The mechanisms of false authority that had been operating behind Kroll's deteriorating condition were exposed publicly and completely. General Kroll himself, receiving his correct medication for the first time in months, apparently dismissed two of the arrested officials personally before his own formal legal proceedings began. What happened to him afterward is its own complicated history, but the manipulation had ended, the false hand guiding the country's worst decisions had been removed, and the people of Valoria began to breathe just slightly differently after that. I returned to my morning prayers, my cold stone floor, my garden. But I was different. Not harder, not prouder, quieter somehow, more careful about the weight of small decisions. I have never believed that what I did made me a hero. I replaced medicine. I kept records. I trusted a woman I had never met. I was afraid every single morning. That is not heroism. That is just someone trying to act with integrity inside an impossible situation. What I do believe is this: courage is not reserved for righteous causes involving people you already love. Sometimes courage means doing the right thing for someone you fear. Sometimes it means protecting principles rather than protecting sides. And sometimes the most dangerous moment in any moral decision is not the first step. It is the moment you discover that doing the right thing will benefit someone you never wanted to help and choosing to do it anyway. I want to ask you something honestly. If you had been standing where I stood, would you have risked everything to expose that hidden corruption, even knowing it might help someone you deeply disagreed with? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think, and if this story kept you questioning every decision until the very last moment, please share it. Because sometimes the most important conversations start with a story someone was afraid to tell for a very long time.